Good evening to you all. I might need to turn my mic on and then. Well, good evening once again to you all and to those watching at home. And why don't we begin with a prayer as we normally do, and then we will pick up. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. I bind and seal all power sources attached to any of us in the most precious blood of Jesus, and I render them all completely helpless, impotent, neutralized, paralyzed, and ineffective. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. You might wonder why I always begin the class with like a minor exorcism. It's just because, because the devil's real. And also because there are particular demons that like to attach themselves to us and cause anxiety. And sometimes anxiety becomes a gateway to opening ourselves up to the demonic. So that's why I do it. So as we begin this third class, Mindfulness in an Anxious World, I'd like to thank all of you for coming. We have a big viewership, just not only those of you who are here, but those of you who are watching live from home. Welcome. And those that watch the recordings both on YouTube and through my podcast, Holiness for the Working Day, as well as the website holiness.work that has a lot of resources there available. And I want to give a special shout out to all of those in Dublin, because we have a lot of viewers in Ireland, as well as all the Kiwis in Auckland, most particularly. There's a lot of New Zealanders who are watching as well. So I've always wanted to go there. So you come from a beautiful country. So, but we began with our prayer, and now we're going to pick up with a mindfulness exercise. It's quite easy. You can do it pretty much anywhere. And it's called a 5 senses mindfulness exercise. So why don't we begin there? As usual, we find ourselves here in this place after probably driving here, after a busy day, maybe a rough night if you're listening to this or watching this just waking up. And so we have to just take some time to calm ourselves. Let's put all the worries of our day behind us and start by taking some deep breaths. Remember, always breathing is very human and important. It's good to breathe in through the nose and out through the mouth. Let me take 3 deep breaths. One more. We always want to breathe from our diaphragm, from our belly. And now I want you to first, we're not going to have our eyes closed, because first notice 5 things that you see. Pick something that you normally don't notice. Something small, perhaps a crack in the brick, a small spot somewhere, something directly in front of you. 5 things that you can see. Be very present to those things. Now notice 4 things you can feel. Perhaps it's the texture of your clothing, the feeling of the breeze, the air conditioning on your skin. Maybe it's your clothing on your hands when you have your hand on your lap. Anything. 4 things that you can feel. Feel them. Nothing else matters at this moment other than that. Now notice 3 things you can hear. 2 things you can smell. And finally, 1 thing you can taste. Maybe a piece of gum in your mouth. Something, maybe it's just open your mouth and take a breath and see if you can taste the air. And now we take one more deep breath. And release. So that's an easy mindfulness exercise you can pretty much do anywhere. It's a good reset when you're having a difficult day, just to take some time aside. It's not only a mindfulness exercise, it could also be a distress tolerance exercise when you feel disconnected from yourself, disconnected from your day, from your body. Those of us who have been through any sort of traumas in our life, there can be a disassociation very easily from a traumatic experience where we almost feel disembodied, where our body and our mind are kind of two separate things during a period of panic or during an episode of PTSD. And so that's a great way to bring us back to our physicality, back to our body, back to the present, back now in this moment, and putting everything else aside by engaging the senses. So I hope that helps you. I have a quote for you. It's quite long, but I think it's one that gives me great hope. I want you to listen to it mindfully, but also try to think, when was this written? The isolation that prevails everywhere, above all in our age, it has not fully developed. It has not reached its limit yet. For everyone strives to keep his individuality as apart as possible, wishes to secure the greatest possible fullness of life for himself. But meantime, all his efforts result not in attaining fullness of life, but self-destruction. For instead of self-realization, he ends by arriving at complete solitude. All mankind in our age have split up into units. They all keep apart, each in his own groove. Each one holds aloof, hides himself, and hides what he has from the rest, and he ends up being repelled by others and repelling them. He heaps up riches by himself and thinks, how strong I am now and how secure. And in his madness, he does not understand that the more he heaps up, the more he sinks into self-destructive impotence. For he is accustomed to rely upon himself alone and to cut himself off from the whole. He has trained himself not to believe in the help of others, in men and in humanity, and only trembles for fear he should lose his money and the privileges that he has won for himself. Everywhere in these days, men have, in their mockery, ceased to understand that the true security is to be found in social solidarity, rather than an isolated individual effort. But this terrible individualism must inevitably have an end, and all will suddenly understand how unnaturally they are separated from one another. It will be the spirit of the time, and people will marvel that they have sat so long in darkness without seeing the light. It's rather true, isn't it? That was written between 1879 and 1880 by Fyodor Dostoyevsky, and it would come out of what began as a serial and then ended up being one of the greatest novels, The Brothers Karamazov. And you think about that, that's the 1800s, and he prophetically is already seeing what's happening in our age, this radical individualism. Now, we would see where Dostoyevsky's Russia would go to radical collectivism, which would destroy the human spirit. We are in an era where radical individualism is being so consuming us that people want the radical collectivism. And what's happening? We're going to go the same way as Russia, unless we recognize in hope that human solidarity is at the root of our peace. True human solidarity, not one imposed by the will of the state in socialism, Marxism, communism, but rather because you and I as individuals have chosen to be in community with others. Not communism, but community living in our families, amongst our friends, with those that we're closest to, within our church, within our neighborhoods. It's incredibly important. Today what I'd like to talk about is at the root of much of our anxiety today. most of the problems that we have, most people are not dealing with a particular anxiety disorder, generalized anxiety disorder, or whatever it might be, which is a psychiatric condition, but rather a self-imposed anxiety based upon a false radical individualism that we have embraced. And we hoard things up. We look for our peace in stuff. I think we're experiencing that greatly today. As we quarantined ourselves in our homes, it became our little castles, but what it also became in a lot of ways is our own hell. And today I want to talk a lot about loneliness, and we're going to go there. We're going to go to a deep place with the loneliness. Because loneliness is, I would argue, the fundamental human problem and the source of most of our problems. And the reason why is because ultimately it's our worst fear. Our worst fear is not just death. Our worst fear is hell. And as I've said before, we've tasted that hell. Anytime we're lonely, anytime that we're caught in a cycle of self and our own egoism, we can easily experience what hell is like. And that's ultimately our greatest fear. Hell is a separation from communion. And everything we know about ourselves, everything that you and I know about ourselves comes out of a relational and a rational social milieu. Like, think about anything that I learn about myself, that I know about myself, comes out of that social milieu. It comes out of my experience of myself and the other, not just within myself. And so everything we know about ourselves comes from that. Because why? You and I are made in the image and likeness of God. And God is a relationship. God is a community of persons, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. And so at the heart of human health, at the heart of human psychological health, at the heart of the health of my mind, body, and spirit, the totality of myself is relationality. And when I lose that, I enter into loneliness. And how can I tell that I'm falling into that? Something that we can do is, if you're just getting by, if you're not connecting with others, really on that very fundamental deep level. And I would say that, in fact, a lot of people are at that, where they think they're going deep, but they're really not. And you know where the real pain for that can be is among married couples. Because very often married couples are together, they're together. You know, you're doing everything together. But isn't it so easy to enter into more of like a business partnership? We get together and you guys are like, oh, we have dinner, things like that. But what happens? Talk about the bills, talk about the kids, talk about where are we going to retire, what are we going to do, the car broke, all these things. But does it go deeper than that? Do we share the deepest fundamental desires of our hearts together? That's real romance, right? Remember when couples can say, remember when you were first romancing each other? And you were revealing yourself. There was a self-revelation. It's the beauty of marital intimacy as well. Physically is that once there's the revelation of the heart and the mind, then within marriage there can be the revelation of the body. Now you can see the fullness of me. You can be truly naked and without shame before somebody. Psychically, spiritually, as well as physically. But what happens is that can easily break down. And it can easily break down because we get wrapped up in the rat race and all the things that we're doing. And then what happens in that is that I no longer have deep relationships. And if I don't have deep relationships anymore, what happens? It's terrifying. It's the most terrifying thing that can happen to us. And we feel ostracized. And ostracism really is like a living death. It's one reason why in camps, in prisoner camps, or even in our prisons, solitary confinement is one of, if not the worst punishment that you can put someone in. Think of a child. We do that with children often. You misbehave, now go to your timeout. No! Like, go be ostracized. And it's hysterical because it's like 5 minutes. 5 minutes of timeout for a 2-year-old is like 10 years in purgatory. It's so painful. But that's why, because we're made not to be in solitary confinement. Albert Schweitzer, who knew a bit about this, said, we are all so much together, but we are all dying of loneliness. You can see that very often. I want to challenge you. You can see it very easily in our culture. Well, when we're not, hiding. Go to a coffee shop and go sit down in the coffee shop and watch what's going on. No one's talking to each other. Coffee shops are quieter than our libraries. People go in, they tune out, they tune in, they start working. But they go to the coffee shop. They're not doing it in their own bedroom. Why? Because we want to be alone together. Like, even when we want to be alone, we want to be together. We're made for community. We're made for socialization. And so what happens is when I start to lose that, and that becomes broken down in my life in some way, when my communal aspects, when my socialization starts to be broken down, then I start to look for an outlet and I start to escape. In the 1950s, Harry Harlow, who was a psychologist, sociologist, conducted an experiment with monkeys. And he took a bunch of rhesus monkeys, and he put them in 3 different groups. The one group was in captivity with a mother, whether their mother or biologically or just a mother monkey. And they did fine. Then there was another group. They were given a fake mom. It was a doll with a milk bottle. And those monkeys actually did okay. They didn't do great, but they did okay. But the third set of monkeys were given a mom that was made of wire mesh with no cloth over it and no bottle. And they just had a bottle off to the side, but it wasn't attached to this fake mom. And what happened is that he recognized and saw that the monkeys were under absolute distress, that they could not handle. Why? Because they were ostracized. They were ostracized from a community, from nurturing. And so what happened is they showed antisocial behavior and all these signs of depression. And what he was trying to show, he posited in his hypothesis, and it was proved, that with the monkeys, but with also any creature, social creature, us being the social creature par excellence, attachment and connection is absolutely fundamental for any organism like us, most particularly ourselves. Interestingly enough, though, it's interesting, Harlow later took those monkeys in the third group and put them with another monkey outside, in the environment outside. And in a very short period of time, the monkey that had been nurtured took on a nurturing role and restored the broken monkey to health. We can be re-socialized. The healthy one becomes the mentor and socialized it in a nurturing connection. So I really want us to focus a lot on this idea of isolation, because we're all very isolated. We cannot live a healthy life. I'm going to say this over and over. You and I cannot live a healthy life in isolation. This is why the minute people often go to a senior home, become sick very quickly because they feel isolated. There's no such thing as a healthy loner. Even hermits live in community. They go and they have their community time because we yearn for it. And it's that yearning, the yearning that is unsatisfied, that's what loneliness feels like. Loneliness is the ache we feel when we yearn for social connection and we're not getting it. That's so important. And it's actually at the root of so many bad, unhealthy relationships. Charlotte Bronte, who wrote Jane Eyre, said, "The trouble is not that I am single and likely to stay single, but that I'm lonely and likely to stay lonely." Isn't that interesting? I see this a lot when in the work that I've done over the years with young adults, college students, young adults in this area. A lot of people move to the Washington, D.C. area, as they do to any capital city, and they're looking for this great possibility to do the things I never dared, and here I'm facing adventure, and why am I so scared? You know, but they come and they're afraid. They're looking for connection. They're looking for community. And this is D.C. D.C., Washington, D.C. is the overachiever capital of the world. It's Hollywood for ugly people. And we all want to meet somebody. You know, the people, they want to meet somebody. But what happens is that this fear of being alone, they come and very often are lonely right away. And they're looking for community connection. And they don't find it. So what happens is they get into a relationship, wherever it might be, usually in a bar. They start to date somebody because it was an easy place to meet somebody, easy place to connect. And what happens is that they start to enter into a relationship because they desire community, they desire communion, they desire companionship. Love that word, companion. It's better than friendship. Why? Companion comes from the Latin, companion, with bread. It's someone that I break bread with. It's someone that I share the banquet of life with. That's why you and I here par excellence at the table of the Lord, what does Jesus do? He creates companionship because now we break bread and are being made one, literally, with him and through him, each other. Now the Mass means so much more. It's the remedy to existential loneliness. But what happens is they begin to date, and they date ferociously many times, looking, searching. But we easily settle for a relationship that's oftentimes unhealthy. Why? Because someone would rather be in an unhealthy relationship than alone. That's what they think. But the problem is when you enter into an unhealthy relationship, you become more lonely than you were before, become more in pain than you were before, and it becomes this never-ending cycle of agony. So people easily settle for someone that they can't be their true self with. They can't really be known by because of that fear of loneliness. So we have to create conditions where we can love people back into communion. I think one of the great philosophers of our modern age was Mr. Rogers, Fred Rogers. I mean, if you ever want to just feel good, you want to feel loved, just watch Mr. Rogers. I remember when I was a kid, because I heard someone, he's a flake. And, he's so peaceful and kind. I'm like, yeah, human beings need to be like that. Well, and if you want to see some great stuff, there's a great documentary recently came out about Mr. Rogers, a great movie, Won't You Be My Neighbor, I think with Tom Hanks. A phenomenal film. There's a great scene in that movie with Tom Hanks where he quotes, they're in a cafe, and he quotes Mr. Rogers, obviously. And Fred Rogers, I'll put this up on my website, both his acceptance speech for a Lifetime Achievement Award as well as the scene from the movie. And he says, "Who has loved you into being? Who has loved you into being?" I mean, this is ultimately, right, the image of God. Okay? God wills me, he loves me into being. My very being not only is given to me by God, but God, this is beautiful. This is, to me, this was the thing that converted my heart. God did not just love me into being. God, who is being himself, he's not one more being in the universe, like a higher being or supreme being. He's not. He is being qua being. He is being itself. Okay? And so the fact that I exist means that God is holding me in existence constantly. If God were to stop thinking about me for a microsecond, I would be annihilated. I would cease to exist, and it would be as though I never existed at all. So God is holding you and I in being. He loves me into being, you into being. So you go, God's not there, God doesn't love me. The very fact that you exist means that God, who is love, is willing you into existence now, and now, and now. Every second counts. So when someone goes, I have nothing to do, I'm bored, nothing is going on, there's never nothing going on. God is always sustaining us in being. But what starts to happen is that I forget that other people do that too. Who has loved you into being? Actually, we're going to do exactly what Mr. Rogers did. We're going to take 1 minute and think about the people that have loved you or are loving you into being. 1 minute. That was beautiful, I hope. That is a great exercise in mindfulness as well when one is feeling incredibly lonely. That there are those that have loved us into being that continue to do so, and we easily forget it. And perhaps when we leave here today, or when we stop listening to this, we'll go and contact those people. And we can say simply, thank you for loving me into being. And if they don't understand it, you can link it to Mr. Rogers, and they'll understand. So when we feel intense anxiety, we can also feel very alone, and we can feel detached from ourselves and from others. One of the great remedies for anxiety is not just mindfulness, is friendship, is being loved, is allowing ourselves to be loved. And just remembering the times that we've been loved will help activate it'll deactivate our threat detector, and it'll activate our higher reasoning, it'll activate our parasympathetic nervous system like I talked about last week, and it actually calms us. That's one of the reasons why a baby can so easily be calmed often by being held by the other parent. So it's like mom's trying to calm the baby down, and then dad takes the baby and the baby calms down. It's like, what the heck? Mom's sitting there going, I've been like for hours. Right? Why? Now it's a switch. It's a change in person. Now I'm being loved into being in a different way, and my levels of oxytocin completely rise. I'll go into that in a little while. The opposite of being loved into being is being shamed and shunned. The two worst feelings that we can have. It is at the root of much of our anxiety and fear. Any acting out or any self-destructive behavior or any way of coping is always, at its root, a way of dealing with that fear of maybe I don't fit in. Very often, young people especially, but all of us, and anyone can get involved, especially in like really bad groups of people, drugs, all these different kinds of things, simply because they just want to fit in. It has nothing to do with the fact that they want to like get wasted. It has absolutely nothing to do with that. But once you do it once, you realize, what the heck was I thinking? Well, I wasn't thinking, that was the problem. But it's because it feels as though there's a group that is now accepting you. You're not feeling shunned or shamed anymore. And that's at the root of so many problems. Think of addictions, very much from that angle. Think of any sin. It comes out of the fact that maybe I will not fit in with God. Maybe God doesn't want me. So now this lesser thing, the thing that's lesser than God, seems much more attractive than the greater thing, which is God. So it's like, if God doesn't exist, if God's not there, let me find an alternative. And that's an interesting thing to question. I like asking friends of mine and stuff who are atheists, and I just say, like, let's say God doesn't exist. What better thing have you found? Because our hearts are desiring something, right? And we're constantly unsatisfied. So what better thing have you found? And then they may say something in my job or whatever it is in a relationship, and I go, how's that working out for you? How's it working out for you? And it's rarely working out well. We're afraid of being shamed and shunned. Most of us have had a sense of struggle with that thought in our life of being accepted and feeling as though we had to hide. And often, the ones who seem like they have it the most together are the ones who have it the least together. It's the silent scream of the popular person. It's a very difficult thing. Today I was in the school and I was walking around and I was praying for the kids as I was walking around, because especially junior high. Junior high is a house of pain, right? In any school. Why? Because that suddenly now we start to take on, once we've reached like 11, 12 years old, that sense of the need to be accepted by a social organism beyond my family becomes incredibly important. And what happens is that when we enter into a place where we feel as though we might not be, we start to put on what Carl Jung would call the persona. It's a mask. It's that mask to say, this is who I am on the outside. There's something very interesting about, I look forward to reading the psychological studies that come out years from now after COVID with everyone wearing masks, because people are regularly telling me, I have a sense that I'm not really known, that I'm divorced from people, that I'm separated from them. And I don't know why. I believe part of it has to do with the fact that we're just not seeing the whole person. We can't see someone smile. We can't see someone yawn. You know that yawning is contagious? So is smiling. And while we're protecting ourselves from contagions, we're protecting ourselves from having a contagious reaction to joy as well, in many ways. So there's this fear. Carl Jung said it's a persona is a kind of mask designed on the one hand to make a definite impression upon others, and on the other to conceal the true nature of the individual. So we want to make an impression, but we also are concealing our true self. And the more we wear the mask, the more we try to take on that persona, the more we feel as though we're disconnected, the more we feel as though we don't have a real relationship, because people don't really know the true us. And there's parts of us that will not be shown. There's parts we don't want to show. It's the underlying cause, actually, of narcissism. People who have a narcissistic problem, you meet people, they could be closeted narcissists, where they're kind of into themselves, and then malignant narcissists, usually called politicians. And things like, and you meet people like this, and people go, gosh, they're so full of themselves. They're so confident. It's the exact opposite. They've lost their true self. And so they have to put on a persona, and that persona has to be watertight, airtight. There cannot be any sense that they have any problem. And so they seem as though they have it all together. You know what else is another form of that is workaholism. I'm so busy. When people say I'm busy, what are they saying? I'm important. Because they're so afraid of being shunned, of being ostracized. I love, and I've said it before in homilies before, busy, it would be an acronym, buried under Satan's yoke. I'm so busy, but actually what happens is the busier we are, the busier we make ourselves, the more we divorce and separate ourselves from true communion with other people. That's scary. There's an outward-facing part that someone will show, but they only want to show that side, and that's the part that meets social success. Here's the problem. When someone meets social success, but it's based upon the persona, the mask that they're wearing, they are afraid that if anyone really knew what they were dealing with, who they really were, they would be completely shunned. And that's where we get imposter syndrome. This idea that's like, if anyone knew who I really was, they would know I was an imposter. I remember years ago, I went to my spiritual director and I told him, God rest his soul, what a wonderful priest. And I said to him, I feel like I'm an imposter, Father. I mean, I'm a priest. I'm in persona Christi. I act and speak in the person of Christ. And I can tell you one thing. I'm not Christ. Like, it's very clear I'm not Christ. And he said to me, oh, James, we're all imposters. There's only one Christ. So get used to it. Embrace it. It's beautiful. But what happens is that underneath, there's this continuation of the problem when somebody is wearing the mask. Okay, I'm in. But if they knew who I really was, how I thought, what my needs were, how inadequate I really am, they'd reject me. And that causes a loop, a cycle of constant anxiety. And that's what we're addressing here. That's what we're dealing with here. Last time I talked a lot about biology and neurobiology. I talked a lot about psychiatry and psychology. This is like human development 101. This is the stuff that needs to be talked about with our children and in our families. This is very important. This is not something that people talk to their kids about. And we need to talk to our kids about it. And it needs to be taught in our schools. It's more important than math and science. It's more important than history and philosophy and theology even. Because if I don't know who I really am, and I'm not willing to face who I really am, I certainly don't want to know who God is. I certainly don't want to know who other people is. And I couldn't care less what year the Constitution was signed. I couldn't care less what the algebraic form. I know nothing about mathematics, so I won't care about that. Why? Because I'm hiding. I'm going to put on the mask. I'm going to put on the persona. Actually, you know what I would do? I would go to all the straight-A students and ask them, what are you hiding from? No, Father, no. Overachiever capital of the world. That's all the most important thing in the world is that they get straight A's. No, it's not. They could get straight A's, and if they hate themselves, if they're buried under Satan's yoke, and if they're wearing a mask, what's going to happen? They're going to be a nervous wreck, and they're going to fall apart. You know what's interesting? I'm saying that right now. I'm looking around the room at the psychologists that are here, and they're like, It's true. Waylon Jennings had a great song that was written by Johnny Cash. It's called I Tremble for You. I like Waylon's version more than Johnny's, believe it or not. These are the words. I'm not going to sing it for you. This world that I live in is empty and cold. The loneliness cuts me and tortures my soul. I'm no child of destiny and no fortune's son. I've just chased you so long now, I'm too weak to run. A new day is here, but nothing is new. Alone in my room, I tremble for you. I know I'll return to the back streets again to find what I need to prove I'm a man. And there I'll treat shame like an old friend from home that I can lean on till my misery is gone. A new day is here and nothing is new. I'm a picture of weakness as I tremble for you. Oh, there's so much pain in that song. And it sounds romantic and great. But what's happening is I'm going to lean on shame as an old friend? No. But what is he doing? He's starting to recognize that he is a picture of weakness. And in recognizing his own weakness and then telling a song about it that sold millions of records, that he's beginning the healing. The beginning of healing is the recognition of my true self. There's an immense power in our ability to empathize and belong and to love. But I'd also say there's an immense power in being able to receive that. And shame keeps us from giving and receiving this. The more shame we have, the more the shame monster eats away at us, it creates a deeper and deeper fear of disconnection. And the more we protect ourselves from vulnerability, the more we grow fearful and disconnected. Vulnerability is at the heart and the key of absolutely everything. It's the heart of the key of our faith, isn't it? When I walk into a church, what's the first thing I see? When I walk into a Catholic church, what's the first thing I see? The crucifix. Doesn't get much more vulnerable than that. He's naked on a cross, out for display. What is there? In our church here, the picture of divine mercy, heart pierced, pouring itself out, speaking the truth of itself. What's the words on the bottom? Jesus, I trust in you. Well, he's saying, I trust in you, here's my heart. And what are you going to say in response? Well, Jesus, I trust in you. It's a vulnerability. Then there's the altar, the place of sacrifice. What happens? He lays himself out. Here's my life. Here's my body. Here's my blood. Here's my whole self. Doesn't get much more than that. That's the marriage bed of the Lamb right there, pouring himself out. Then there's the tabernacle. God, utterly available to us, come, consume me so that I can consume you in love. Absolute vulnerability. That's the answer to everything, is this power of vulnerability. And the more we protect ourselves from the vulnerability, the more fearful and disconnected we become. And it closes us in from engaging with people and being engaged by people. Haven't we felt that before when we don't want to be vulnerable? And you go and you're at a dinner and you sit there. You're like alone in this room of people. And there's this, it's like, I don't want to open up. But what happens is that the more that happens, the more we stop engaging the world around us. I think that when people are terminally bored, and I'll go into boredom in a minute, when they're terminally bored, they're dying. Why? Because they've stopped recognizing the beauty of the world around them. And so they're searching. But on the other side, vulnerability is the courage of putting yourself out there. I'm going to put a video up on the website that I highly recommend. It's a TED Talk by Brené Brown. I'm sure many of you have seen it. It's one of the most watched TED Talks in the world. She lays out the power of vulnerability perfectly. It's so beautiful to see it. But vulnerability is the courage to actually put ourselves out there, and despite the fact that it could hurt us. Like when I love, I'm opening myself up for the possibility of being loved too, but I'm also opening myself up, making myself vulnerable to the possibility that I could get hurt, that I could be rejected, that I could be pushed away, that I could be ostracized and shamed and shunned. And that's really the difficulty we're facing today in so many ways. Look at the social media world, where so many people have spent time, especially during COVID. People are just consuming the social media. And what happened? It's all a fear of being inadequate. It's comparison. And that's fearful. The cancel culture. I'm afraid to speak my mind because I'm afraid I'm going to be canceled. The materialistic culture. It's like, I got to have all these things or I'm not, that's part of my mask. The virtual culture. We have virtual relationships, not real relationships. It's virtually close, but not really close. Not just physically, but how often are people on a deep conversation where they're really pouring themselves out on Zoom? It's very hard to do that because you can't be hugged by the person. They can't embrace you. You're not really face to face. We say, I can't wait to be with you. Not to see you, I can't wait to be with you. The horrible culture, the horrible cultures we've created in some of our big cities, especially places like Washington, D.C. I mean, this is the least vulnerable town in the world. New York City, another example. London, any major city. Because in order to cut it there, you have to have a mask. A really rock-solid mask so often. Anywhere where there's an image in anything. Our students, one of the dangers of our schools is that our students are learning how not to be vulnerable from the earliest years of their life, especially in junior high and high school. It's where image takes over. It takes divine status in some ways. And where we learn how not to be vulnerable because we're afraid of being shamed and shunned, not just by our fellow students, but oftentimes by administration, faculty, and staff. That very easily shame and shun someone if they're not living up to expectations. There are so many people who are brilliant students or brilliant people who were convinced when they were younger that they were dumb because they had bad teachers. That's so painful for them. And even in families where vulnerability is difficult, where mom and dad expect hard grades, hard results, all the time, always striving, where's the resume? And they might not mean to do that, right? Mom and dad's usually like, I want the best for you. I want you to have a good life, and so I'm going to hold you to this. But that's all their kid hears so easily. And so what happens is that the struggle of life is never discussed. The fear. I might take them to confession, go stand in line, go. But they don't talk about like the real humanity. And so there has to be this shame of being perfect. But to be vulnerable feels absolutely amazing. But it's hard. How often people go to therapy for the first time? And they can be their true self, and their therapist is like, yeah, good, awesome, keep going. And they're like, wow, I can be myself. How often, it's one of the beauties of being a priest. Like, to me, the greatest joy of a priest is hearing confessions. Because we can go and say what our true self is in all of its faults and weaknesses. And what do we hear? The most beautiful words in the English language. God, the Father of mercies, through the death and resurrection of his Son, has reconciled the world to himself and sent the Holy Spirit among us for the forgiveness of sins. Through the ministry of the church, may God give you pardon and peace, and I absolve you from your sins. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. And you can walk out being your real self. An absolute radical transformation. No therapist can do that, no friend can do that, no parent can do that, no spouse can do that. No one can do that other than the one who has been given the ability through words to change reality. Think about that. It's beautiful. There's a lot of things that can change reality, right? When you are watching a baseball game and the guy slides and you go, you're out! Well, that doesn't change reality, but if the umpire says it, he's out. Well, anyone can say the words I just said, but it's only the priest who's given the power of God to actually relieve us of our shame. And it's beautiful. And it becomes a dress rehearsal for every other friendship and every other relationship. Because if I can say it to some dude who's a sinner like me, by the way, then I can say it to the person who loves me the most. My spouse, my family, my best friends, all those people. And so in any culture, we desire to be relieved of shame. And I said it before, there's people watching this all around the world. And guess what? They're no different than anyone in this room. We all desire that. And so I want to ask you this, is like, what's your brokenness? What's your brokenness? Think about it for a second. How are you hurting? How are you broken? What's the thing you don't want anyone else to see? The thing you want no one else to understand? What's your mask look like? What's your persona? Who do you pretend to be? It's important for us to be able to do it here because that's really what the church has to be. The church, our churches, need to be a place of encounter, as the Holy Father says, and a place of acceptance. It needs to be a place of where we can be challenged by the gospel. And not what the world says. The world says, do whatever you want, whatever's good for you, your truth is your truth, you do you. But that's not love. That's not love at all. It means don't bother me. You go do your thing until it bothers me, until it enters into my space. In other words, go be vulnerable until your vulnerability hurts me and affects me. That's not love. That's not acceptance. We should be challenged to grow, to be truly courageous, so that we can be free. And there's no shame, because we're all handicapped. There's not a single entrance to this church that says, for non-sinners only. Right? Every entrance. For sinner, for sinner, for sinner, for sinner. We've got too many entrances in this church. For sinner, for sinner, for sinner. Nobody knows each other because they're always running out to the parking lot. There's too many entrances. And so what happens is that this is the privileged place. And when I'm not in the privileged place, I'm in hell. I'm alone. And that's why we're dealing with so much anxiety. There's not a person alive that doesn't want in some way to be free and to remove their mask and to live wholeheartedly. What does wholehearted living look like? Like, what does it look like to be truly alive? Having a lot of money? No. Okay, think of all the things that we put on our resume. They ask you in an interview. I love when you go into job interviews, and they're like, so what are your dreams and your hopes and all these kinds of things? And people just lay out the most banal, base, stupid stuff. You know, what are your dreams and how I want there to be world peace? And, you know, it's, yeah, that's nice, okay. But what does it look like to live fully alive? By engaging our lives from a place of worthiness. Engaging our lives from a place of worthiness. You are worthy. You are worthy to be loved. You are enough. Regardless, no matter what you manage to do or what you manage to not do in life, you're enough. You're not a burden to anyone. And even though you're imperfect and sometimes afraid and sometimes weak, you're also brave. You're brave and you're worthy to belong. Does anyone ever say that to you? Isn't that rare to hear that? You are worthy to be loved. But we need to be brave too. We have to be brave in order to accept that, in order to live that. And so to live a life fully alive, it means living a life of authenticity, to let go of what people think. Like, imagine what a life would look like if we stopped caring what people think. Imagine if people went on social media and were like, yeah, today I made coffee and I cleaned the dishes and I changed 6 poopy diapers and we actually said what we did, right? And all those things, yeah, and I wrote 7 emails and I can't stand email. No, what do people do? Look at me, look at where I went, look at what I bought, look at who I think I am, look at the photoshopped existence that I have, right? That's not authenticity. That's not sincerity. Self-compassion is another one. By allowing ourselves to let go of perfectionism. I'll do a whole class on perfectionism. Because perfectionism is an addiction. I have to get it right. Everything has to be right. Everything has to be perfect. And what happens is that we beat ourselves up. There's no self-compassion. We're compassionate to other people, but we hate ourselves. We beat ourselves up. Resiliency. By letting go of all the things that we do to numb ourselves and to be powerless. By living gratitude. The exercise I had us do just a moment ago where we were looking and saying, who has loved me into being? That's an exercise in gratitude. A hallmark of all saints is that they have gratitude. A hallmark of every miserable person is that they complain about everything and have no gratitude. But trust and faith. By letting go of the need for certainty. This is a big one. We live in an age where we want absolute certainty for everything. One of the things that atheists often do, what I would call evangelistic atheists, where they'll I've had them walk up to me on the street when I'm not wearing this, and I'm like, yes, bring it. You know, I love it, because what they want is they try to get me to a point where they go, how certain are you that God exists? My reaction I often want to go is, how certain are you that your mother loves you? You can't have absolute certainty about most things. We can't actually have absolute certainty about most scientific things, because absolute certainty would require that I actually did the experiments myself. So what happens? I didn't do all the experiments. I've never done a Newtonian experiment on gravity, and yet I believe that it exists. Okay, why? I take his work for granted. I take it on faith. That I need to have faith. That I'm not going to have absolute certainty. This is something I tell people all the time when they're thinking about getting married. But Father, how can I know? How can I know that he's the right one? How can I know she's the right one? You can't. No, but I need to know. Then don't get married. No, because what's going to happen like when you get married 15 minutes later? You're going to go, well, how do I know they still love me? Because now they know me even more, and even more, and even more. What's going to happen? There's no certainty. So letting go of the need for certainty gives us an immense amount of freedom. Creativity also allows us to know our worthiness by really letting go of comparison. I don't have to compare myself to people. Compare and despair. But if we just embrace our inner creativity, and then we go and we do creative things, and sometimes we're going to make mistakes, and sometimes it's going to look stupid, and sometimes it's going to look silly and ugly. I love it. One of my favorite things to do, I have an art studio here in the church. I love painting. I'm a painter. Mostly modern stuff that most of my friends hate and despise and think it's horrible, and they think it's communist and all these things, and I'm like, I don't care. I love doing it. Right? And I paint, and guess what? For every canvas I paint that's good, there's like 20 that were terrible. But it allows us to have the freedom. We don't have to compare ourselves. I got rid of all my social media. I got rid of Instagram. I don't care if anyone ever sees my art. I'm doing it because I think it's beautiful and I like it. What do you do that's beautiful? Do you sing in the shower? I don't know, you might have roommates. I don't want them to hear me. Sing it out and sing it loud. It's great. How about art? How about dance? Do you dance around your house while you're cleaning and things like that? Or are you worried that Twyla Tharp is going to be there and she's going to be, no, you didn't do it right. No, she's a choreographer. Play and rest. Play and rest is so important. Today, I was in the school and it was great because the kids are there and they're learning in a very unique environment right now. Sometimes they have their like Chromebooks out. Sometimes they're, but all of them were like, and I was like, what? And I go, oh, is it recess time? Yeah, it's almost recess. I need to go play, right? And they can't wait to go run around and play. But then what happens is somewhere around 7th grade, 6th grade, end of 6th grade, beginning of 7th grade, someone told them, okay, now you need to grow up. Stop playing. And what happens? The minute we stop playing, we become miserable, anxious, alone, upset. When was the last time you just went to go play? Remember when we were kids, we would go play. Now we work out. Right? We would play, now it's work out. That's always work. It's the work, I have to do it hard. I mean, when was the last time do you sit and you lift your weights or do whatever you do, your like PT and stuff and say like, this is so much fun. No, when was the last time we just had fun? Play, the power of play. Because that means we have to let go of our busyness as a sign of our self-worth and a status symbol. Meaningful work. Letting go of what we're supposed to do. This is something I hear in college that I heard in college so often. I hear from people so much. Why are you studying engineering? Well, it's because like my family told me I'd be a good engineer, it's what I always said I was going to do. Are you passionate about it? Well, not really. Then why are you doing it? Why are you spending $25,000, $30,000, $50,000, $60,000 a year to study something you don't care about? I'll ask someone. I ask someone. I go, "What do you want to be? What do you want to be when you grow up? What do you want to do?" It's, Father, actually, I think I'm called to the priesthood. Then why are you not studying that? Like, go do the thing that you are passionate about, and it takes away our stress, and it rips down the masks. And yeah, we're going to disappoint people, and our parents or our friends might be upset, or whatever it might be. Who cares? They're not the one living your life. You are. And then finally, laughter, as I talked about last week, and song. And dance. It's true culture. We live in a pragmatic society, and not just the United States, pretty much every first world country. It's all about, is it useful? What did you build? What did you make so it can be useful? But the beauty of song and dance and laughter and wasting time with friends and cooking wonderful meals and listening to funny music and all those things is that it has no use whatsoever. And that's why it's beautiful. If you're anxious and stressed and want to be mindful, then go play. We're going to end the class here. I'm not going to do a mindfulness activity with you tonight because your mindfulness activity is to go home and play. Pick up a coloring book, grab some crayons, go take ketchup and mustard and throw it on the wall. Whatever it might be. Take lipstick and just do it up. Just do it up, right? I remember as a little kid, there's a picture, every family has the picture of the little kid who's there like holding the lipstick and it's like all over their face, right? Because they were playing. Your mindfulness exercise is to go home, shut off your phone, shut off your computer, shut off work, shut off all those things. If you have kids, go do it with the kids and play. And allow yourself to have as much enjoyment as you did when you were 5. And I promise you, you will be so present for a moment, the mask will fall off. Next week, we'll continue talking about the mask and how we can continue to be vulnerable and open up and find that joie de vivre, the joy of life once again. Have an awesome night. Are there any questions that I can answer for anybody? I haven't been doing that every time, but are there any questions that anybody has? I shut off the recording, so. No? Yeah. Retirement in America. What do I think of retirement in America? That's a very, very good question. All right, good. So obviously retirement is fun. What we need to do is I believe, we need to change what we're doing and not stop doing. You know, a lot of people think, I'm going to retire means that I can sit back and do nothing. No, we shouldn't do that. Even when we relax, like even on vacation, we shouldn't just do nothing. We should be doing something that rejuvenates. What is that? Rejuvenility. In other words, that gives us our youth back, right? That recreates, that recreates our hearts, that recreates our minds, okay? Rather than vacating, rather than taking vacation where I become empty and dull. Because what happens is a lot of times, what really engages us is the act of creativity, the act of doing things with people and community. And when people retire, they often leave one of the communities that they were in for a while, their professional community, but they don't reestablish a new community. And there's a sense of loneliness, a sense of fear, a sense that I'm no longer useful for anything. And it's actually one of the reasons why often, and I know you're not that way, but often elderly people, older people as they're going into the twilight years of their life, become very negative and bitter and hostile and angry and fearful because they're afraid of being alone. For good reasons. Like when I talk to someone and they're those things, my heart goes out to them. And I believe that the remedy to that is if we actually sat down and took time. And I'm gonna leave you with this story on this. There was a woman, when I was in the seminary, I was in Allentown, Pennsylvania at doing the spiritual year that we had there. I went to this senior home. Was my assignment on Thursdays is I would go to a senior retirement home. And there was a lady there who was very, very old, like over 100. And I went and my ministry was to sit and speak with these people, especially her, every week, just to keep her company, because she was completely abandoned. There was no one there. Her kids wouldn't see her. No one was in her life. And it was so sad. But she started to come back to life when I was with her. And I would sing songs, because I thank God I grew up with around my grandparents, so I knew all the songs from like the 20s and the 30s and the 40s, and all the old standards and the jazz tunes, so I would sing them and the Broadway songs, and she enjoyed it. But I would question and ask her things all the time about her life, and she was literally, to me, the most boring person I'd ever met in my life. Like she had no good stories, nothing, I thought, and I was just like, oh my gosh, it was like really difficult. And when I first met her, she was very bitter. But then she slowly started to change. Well, one day, one of the last times that I went to go visit her, she asked me if I would get something out of her closet. And so I walked up and I reached up to the closet and I grabbed, it was a box that was there. So I think it was photos she wanted to show me. And all of a sudden, all the other boxes fell on my head, including a piece of luggage. And I was like, oh, man. And she goes, oh, wow. And I said, what is it? She goes, oh, that just reminds me of something. What did it remind you of? Oh, it reminded me when a suitcase fell on my father's head. That was a hard day. Why did the suitcase fall on your father's head? Well, the ship was starting to sink. Yeah, she was a Titanic survivor. Yeah, I mean, and I was like, all this time, spending time with you. Now I'm moving back to Virginia, and you tell me, what are you talking about, lady? She had a story to tell. Okay, to answer the question about retirement, people will retire, and it's as though no one wants to hear their story anymore. If you want to define a human being, we are animals that tell stories. Okay? That could be a good definition of a human being. We're animals that tell stories. Okay. If no one wants to hear your story anymore, then you die inside first. And as I've said in the first class, if you want to create chronic disease, create chronic loneliness. And so often, and I will say especially men, because I think we're a little less, it's easier for us to be more defined by what we do, not who we are. Okay? Women are usually, I think mainly because you carry life within you, are a little better at being able to see the purpose of their life relationally rather than task-oriented. So, but not always. But men, very often, because we're so task-oriented, when those tasks that gave us definition, when those tasks that gave us the glory stories, when those tasks that gave us something to do are taken away, then our purpose for living is taken away. And when our purpose for living is taken away, we start to die very slowly on the inside, and it creates chronic disease, and it creates chronic fear. And that fear, how do I react against that fear? I fight it, and that's why people are angry, and these kids these days, and all these different things. Well, everything's a threat. My life is a threat. You're a threat. This culture's a threat, right? So what do? How do we help them? Listen to their stories. Let them tell their stories again. Draw them out. Become an expert question asker. And if you're in that space in life, if you're in that space and in that place and you start to feel hostile, angry, alone, by all means tell somebody. Because most people are very empathetic, or they want to be, and they want to say, oh, you're alone? Whoa, you're lonely? I'm sorry, I didn't know that. Come, let's sit. Okay, so did that answer your question? All right. But it's also good, we spend all of our life saving up money for what? So that we can go live what? You don't have the energy and the vitality that you had when you were 18, yet people are saving money and making plans as though they're still going to have that energy and vitality. And then they don't have it. So, we should save and we should get ready for retirement. But at the same time, I think, go play. Go have adventures now while you have your health about you. And then someday, when you're old, you won't be alone because you had the adventures with other people and you had something to share. And that's what creates community, a common story. Have an awesome night.